Hi, I'm Maven, and my sister called me the maid while living in my house for free. She barked orders like I owed her something. Wash my clothes, make me breakfast, that's your duty. And my father? He believed every word she told him over dinner. By dessert, he looked me in the eyes and said, "You're no longer my daughter." Then he pointed to the door. I walked out without looking back. But what came next? It wasn't revenge. It was something much, much colder. Before we dive in, what time is it where you are? Where are you listening from? Drop a comment. I'd love to know. And maybe tell me, what would you do if your own family erased you? Watat. It was early, too early for another argument. The house still smelled faintly of coffee and laundry detergent, a mix that used to feel like home, but now just meant tension. I stood by the counter, stirring sugar into my cup, the spoon clinking softly against the porcelain. That tiny sound felt like the only thing still listening to me in this house. From the top of the stairs, her voice came down sharp and clear. "Maven, don't just stand there. Wash my clothes and make me breakfast. It's your duty." I didn't turn around. The coffee rippled in my hand. Her robe, my robe, whispered against the banister as she came down, every step lazy, like she owned the place. She hadn't paid a cent for rent in 6 months, but somehow she'd claimed every inch of this house as hers. "The cereal's in the pantry," I said quietly. My voice came out flat, steady. She gave a short, mocking laugh. "You should be thankful I'm keeping the house alive while you're gone all day." Alive. I wanted to laugh. This house wasn't alive anymore. It was suffocating under her perfume, her mess, her endless noise. I moved past her, careful not to make eye contact. There was a time when I'd fight back, when I'd explain, argue, plead, but not anymore. Silence had become my shield. I'd learned that arguing with someone like Vela was like pouring gasoline on a fire and expecting it to cool. She dropped onto the couch, scrolling through her phone. "I posted that video of the kitchen you remodeled," she said. "People love it. You're welcome." "It's my kitchen," I said under my breath. "What was that?" she asked without looking up. "Nothing," I lied. "Glad people liked it." She didn't notice the way my hand trembled when I set the cup in the sink. I let the water run, cool and steady. The sound filled the room. For a moment, I watched the stream hit the porcelain and swirl down the drain, like words I could never say. The cup, simple and white, stayed in my hand longer than it needed to. I held it still, as if the silence inside it could keep me from breaking. That's when the memory hit. 6 months ago, her tearful call at midnight. "I just need a place for a few weeks, May. You know I wouldn't ask if I had another option." I'd opened my door the next morning, barefoot and half asleep, thinking family meant something permanent. She arrived with 4 suitcases and a story that changed every week. Now, half a year later, I couldn't remember what my home looked like without her things spilling out of every corner. "Did you pick up my dry cleaning?" she asked suddenly. I looked up. "Your what?" She frowned. "You said you'd grab it yesterday." I said I'd grab my dry cleaning, not yours. Her face twisted into that practiced mix of shock and offense. "Wow, so that's the kind of sister you are now?" There it was, that guilt dagger she always threw. She didn't shout. She didn't have to. Her words carried the same weight as shouting. I wiped my hands on a towel and forced a smile. "I'm the kind of sister who has to get to work in 10 minutes. She scoffed. "Work, work, work. You'd think you were saving the world." "Someone has to pay for this house," I said, softer than I meant to. Her phone buzzed and she smirked. "Dad says we're all having dinner tonight. Be on time. No excuses." I froze. Dinner, which meant stories, sides, manipulation, the Hale family special. I nodded once. "Sure, I'll be there." She sauntered back upstairs, her slippers dragging on the steps like a victory march. I listened to her hum one of those songs she played on repeat, the same tune that somehow made my skin crawl now. When the silence returned, I turned off the faucet. The house went still again, just the faint ticking of the wall clock and the hum of the fridge. I stood there for a long time, holding the towel, staring out the window at the quiet street. Leaves gathered on the porch. The world outside moved on, clean and ordinary. My phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Dad lit up the screen. "Dinner tonight. Be on time. No excuses." I stared at it, the corners of my mouth tightening. My stomach felt like it was shrinking, not from fear, but from knowing the script too well. Of course she set it up. Of course she did. I picked up the cup again, rinsed it clean, and set it on the rack to dry. The same white cup, the same silence. I whispered, barely loud enough for myself to hear. "Alive," she said. "It's dying from your presence." The morning light hit the kitchen tile, cold and pale. I poured out the rest of the coffee, grabbed my bag, and headed for the door. Just before stepping out, I glanced back at the table, at her robe draped carelessly over the chair, at the half-eaten toast she left behind. My house, her chaos. The text glowed again on my phone. "Dinner tonight," I sighed. "Of course she did," I said under my breath, slipping the phone into my pocket as I walked out into the gray Portland morning. I pulled out of the driveway and let the silence settle, the kind of silence that creeps into your car after a long breath and an even longer day, the kind that fills every corner like fog, thick and familiar. Traffic was light and the skies were darkening the way October evenings always did in Portland. Early, with a dull gray that warned of rain. I stopped at the corner store for a bottle of Cabernet, Dad's favorite. Or at least, it used to be. I stared at the label for a while before grabbing it, as if that small gesture could smooth over whatever I was walking into. I knew it wouldn't, but sometimes you do the right thing anyway, even if no one notices. The Hale family home was only 15 minutes away. I hadn't been there in weeks, maybe longer. The moment I parked and stepped out, I could smell it. Rosemary and garlic, Vela's signature, not Dad's. He never cooked with herbs like that. It was her mark. She had arrived first and made sure everyone felt it. The porch light buzzed as I stepped onto the front steps, bottle in hand. I paused for a second before knocking. I didn't know why. Maybe because I already knew what was waiting behind that door. Or maybe because some part of me still hoped I was wrong. The door opened before I even raised my hand. "You're late," Vela said, grinning like a cat who'd already eaten. I checked my watch. "It's 6:58. She stepped aside, letting me in without a word. Her perfume hit me first. Sharp, floral, overbearing. The kind of scent that clung even after you left the room. Dad was already at the table. He didn't stand when I entered, didn't smile, just glanced at me, then at the wine bottle in my hand. "I brought this," I said, holding it out like an offering. He didn't take it, just looked at it, then back at his plate. "I don't drink much these days," he muttered. That wasn't true, but I let it go. I placed the bottle on the sideboard and took a seat. Vela sat beside him, arms draped over her chair like she owned it. "Dad, I told you," she said, shaking her head. "She always tries to impress with things. It's her love language. Flashy gestures, not real connection." I stared at her. She smiled. "You've been acting strange lately, Maven. Maybe stressed from guilt?" The air turned heavier. The scent of the roast chicken, the candle flickering in the center, the sound of silverware against china. It all blurred into something surreal. Dinner began with small talk. Dad asked about work, barely listening to the answer. Vela filled in the silences, laughing too loud, correcting my stories, twisting memories into something else. "Remember when I moved in?" she said, cutting into her chicken. You said you'd always support me, but then, she looked down, as if suddenly remembering a wound. You started changing. You got cold. You told me to pay rent, threw away my clothes, said I was dead weight. What? I blinked, stunned. She didn't look at me, just kept her voice soft, cracking at the edges. I kept quiet, because that's what you do for family, but it got worse. She even called me a burden. Dad's fork clinked against his plate. You said that, Maven? He asked without meeting my eyes. No, I said, calm but clear. None of that's true. She printed them, Vela said quickly. The texts. I didn't want to show you, Dad, but I think you need to see. She pulled out folded papers from her purse. How convenient. The ink was dark, the words bold. I knew instantly they weren't real. The messages were faked, carefully crafted. The tone wasn't mine. The wording was too sharp, too scripted. She made these, I said. That's not how I speak. Dad looked at me like I'd just stolen from him. You've disappointed me, Maven. You've always been selfish. Even as a kid, you made everything about you. That hit harder than anything Vela could have said. I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. I reached for the cup in front of me. It was plain, white, porcelain, just like the one I'd washed that morning. I held it gently. It rattled slightly against the plate as I lifted it. My hand was steady, but something inside me shook. Silence filled my throat. I could have screamed. I could have pulled the truth out like teeth. But what would it change? They had already decided who I was. My words would only sound like excuses. Dad stood. He didn't shout. He didn't even look angry, just tired. You're no longer my daughter. The words didn't echo. They settled. Vela dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, but I saw it. The smirk hiding just behind her sympathy. She'd won this round, and she knew it. I stood up, slow and deliberate. My shoes, I said quietly. Vela's eyes flickered. Oh, I must have forgotten to bring them in. They're still in the trunk. Sorry. I didn't answer. I didn't owe her anything. Barefoot, I walked to the door. The tile felt cold, but I kept moving, out onto the porch, into the night. The rain had started, soft but steady. I paused under the porch light and let it fall against my skin. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I just exhaled. A long, quiet breath that felt more like release than defeat. That was the moment I knew I would never beg again. Not for understanding, not for love, not for space in someone else's story. As I reached my car, my phone buzzed in my back pocket. A message from Vela. You'll thank me someday. I stared at it, the glow lighting up the raindrops on my windshield. Then I whispered, You're right. But not for the reason you think. The wipers kept sweeping across the windshield, steady as a heartbeat, until the road lights began to blur into soft lines of gold and gray. I drove without music, without thought, just the rhythm of rain filling the silence between me and everything I'd just lost. When I reached my apartment, I didn't get out right away. I sat there, hands still on the steering wheel, watching the rain gather and slide down the glass. It was strange, how quiet heartbreak could be. No screaming, no tears, just the sound of water. Eventually, I opened the door. The air hit cold against my face. My shoes were still at my father's house, so I stepped out barefoot, feeling the wet pavement soak into my skin. It grounded me somehow, painful, real. Inside, my apartment felt smaller than I remembered. The walls seemed to absorb the sound of the rain, turning the silence into something heavier. I hung my coat, tossed my purse on the chair, and stood for a moment in the dark. The city outside hummed faintly, muffled by distance. The kitchen light flicked on with a soft click. I reached for the kettle, filled it, and set it on the stove. The motion was automatic, like muscle memory. My hands knew what to do, even if my mind didn't. When the water started to hum, I pulled out the same white porcelain cup from that morning, the one that had caught all my words before they could escape. I poured the water, dropped in a tea bag, and watched the steam curl upward. But I didn't drink. I just stared. The way the vapor rose and disappeared felt too familiar, like the past few hours had already dissolved into something intangible, something I couldn't hold. My phone buzzed again. I ignored it, then it buzzed again. A notification from work this time, my colleague, Nora. "Did you approve the transfer your dad mentioned? It went through today." Transfer? My stomach twisted. I opened the email attached, reading it once, then again, slower this time. It was a legal confirmation, an ownership change for Hale Construction, my father's company, the one I'd spent years building alongside him. Every permit, every licensing form, every account setup had my signature somewhere in its foundation. And now it was gone. All of it transferred to Vila. There was a note at the bottom, filed by Richard Hale, represented by attorney Clyde Harver, filed 3 days ago. So while I was still setting the table, boiling his favorite wine sauce, still believing I had a family, he had already erased me on paper. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was deletion. I leaned against the counter, gripping its edge until my knuckles went pale. My reflection in the window looked like someone else entirely. Someone tired, stripped bare, but still standing. "You taught me to earn everything, Dad," I whispered to the empty room. "Now I'll show you what I learned." I didn't cry. I didn't even blink for a while. Just walked to the bookshelf and picked up the framed photo of him, young, proud, standing beside me at the groundbreaking of our first project. The sunlight in that photo had looked like promise back then. Tonight, it just looked like a lie. I set the frame down carefully and walked to my desk. My laptop sat there, closed for weeks. I flipped it open, the screen lighting up my face in pale blue. My fingers hesitated, then began typing. Property records, business filings, public deeds. Each search result felt like uncovering another bruise I didn't know I had. And then, buried in a line of legal text, I found it. The house deed. My house. My signature. Still listed as co-owner. The document hadn't been amended, couldn't be amended without my consent. I sat back, the first faint spark of something, control, flickering inside me. They could twist stories, fake messages, manipulate a father's heart. But paperwork didn't lie. Not when you knew where to look. Outside, the wind shifted. The curtain by the kitchen window fluttered, catching the city light like a moving ghost. For a second, I thought of that morning again. The stillness, the water running over porcelain, the cup holding all the words I hadn't said. Only this time, the air felt different. Not suffocating, moving, whispering. I stood, walked toward the window, and let the wind brush against my face. The tea beside me had gone cold. The steam had long vanished, leaving only the faint scent of chamomile and something else. Resolve. For the first time since dinner, I smiled. Just a small, quiet curve of my lips. "You wanted me out of the house," I murmured, closing my laptop. "Now you'll have to invite me back in." I turned off the light. The rain outside kept tapping gently against the glass, steady and sure. And in that rhythm, I found something that almost felt like peace. The kind that comes not from things getting better, but from finally accepting they won't and deciding to move anyway. 2 days later, a crisp Saturday morning blanketed Portland with that familiar bite of fall. Leaves clung to their last bits of color before surrendering to the wind. I parked across from the house I grew up in, the one that used to mean safety. Now it just meant unfinished business. I stepped out, folder in hand. My heels clicked purposefully across the driveway. My breath fogged up as I exhaled slow and steady. I didn't knock. I didn't need to. Vela was already at the door. She wore my robe again, like some perverse ritual. A mug in hand, one of my old ones. Her lips curled, but it wasn't a smile. Well, well, look who decided to crawl back, she drawled. I tilted my head. Actually, I came to remind you whose name is on the deed. She blinked, just for a second, then laughed. You're kidding. I stepped past her, brushing against her shoulder without apology. Does it look like I'm joking? Inside, the house smelled like burnt cinnamon and too much air freshener. A cover-up, like always. She followed behind me as I placed the folder gently on the dining table. I opened it slowly, one page at a time, property deed, unpaid rent invoices, bank records, all neat, all factual, all legal. Every night you've spent here, every shower, every flick of a light switch, under my name, I said calmly, sliding the documents toward her. Vela laughed again, but it wavered. God, you're so dramatic. I looked at her without blinking. No, I'm just done being quiet. Before she could retort, Dad walked in, tugging at his cardigan. He froze mid-step. Maven? Vela turned quickly, voice syrupy. She's trying to start something again, Dad. She's obsessed with... I held up the final page, his signature beside mine, unmistakable, undeniable. He stared at it like it was in a foreign language. I'm not here to fight, I said. I'm here to inform. I picked up the mug she left on the counter, another one of mine from years ago. Same make, same blue ring around the top. I held it a moment. Funny how these cups follow me everywhere, I said softly. Then set it down with care, no clatter, just presence. Vela scoffed. You think that little pile of paper means anything? Please, no one's kicking me out. I turned to her. If I file today, the locks change by Monday. But I thought I'd offer a more graceful option. Dad looked from her to me, unsure, silent. She growled. You're bluffing. I shook my head. No, I'm choosing not to embarrass you. Her voice cracked. This is insane. She's controlling, Dad. She's always been... Enough, he said, quiet but firm. Then to me, is this true? I didn't answer him. I didn't need to. Truth has a weight that doesn't need permission to be felt. I closed the folder and stepped back. This isn't revenge. It's correction. Vela's eyes were wide now, darting, scrambling to find leverage. You can't just walk away from this. I looked over my shoulder. You said I'd thank you someday. This is me thanking you for showing me who I was never meant to be. I headed for the door. You're not walking away, she hissed. I stopped at the threshold, hand on the knob, turned slightly. I'm not walking away. I'm walking ahead. The door clicked shut behind me, sealing in years of swallowed words and giving them a new home, outside. As I crossed the porch, I heard it. The crash of porcelain, the mug, no doubt, shattered. But what stayed with me wasn't the sound. It was the silence that followed, and the fact that my father didn't say a single word. The sound of breaking porcelain stayed in my head longer than I wanted it to. For days, I kept hearing it, softly, in the background of every quiet room. But a week later, it wasn't the sound that haunted me. It was the silence that followed, the kind that tells you something has truly ended. I thought reclaiming my space would feel like victory. Instead, it felt like aftermath. It was Thursday afternoon, the city buzzing just beyond my office window. My desk was neat, my emails stacked in clean digital rows. On the surface, I looked like myself again, composed, organized, unbothered. But something inside me still hummed with unfinished tension, like a song stuck mid-note. Every email from my father sat unanswered in my drafts folder. Every family group message filled with silence where I used to respond. And Vela, God, she hadn't stopped. Mutual friends told me she'd been talking. painting herself as the victim. The narrative had shifted, just as she'd planned, the generous sister who took in the ungrateful one. I took a sip of my coffee and scrolled through the morning's messages. Project updates, invoices, reminders. Then one subject line froze me. You should know what she's been doing. No name, no signature, just that sentence. Curiosity, or maybe dread, made me click. The first photo loaded slowly, then another, and another. There she was, Vila, standing in my living room, smiling for a group of strangers. Wine glasses raised. The caption read, "Dinner at the Hale residence, finally taking over what's rightfully mine." The next picture hit harder, her wearing my mother's necklace. I felt the air leave my lungs. That necklace had been buried with Mom, or at least it was supposed to be. The chain was silver, the pendant a tiny gold locket shaped like a leaf. My mother wore it every Sunday, saying it was her piece of calm. She told me once, "When people forget who you are, this will remind you." Seeing it there, around Vela's neck, glittering under my dining room light, felt like a punch straight to the heart. The photos continued, different angles, same house, people I didn't know laughing in the background, wine being poured, laughter that didn't belong there. Then the last image, my father. He was seated beside her, smiling faintly, holding a glass of the same Cabernet I'd given him the night he disowned me. On his wrist was the watch I'd bought him for his 60th birthday. The caption read, "Some gifts belong to those who truly appreciate them." I stared until my screen dimmed. My throat felt tight, but I didn't cry. Not this time. "You took everything, Vela," I whispered to the empty room, "even what wasn't yours to touch." The city noises below faded. The ticking clock behind me became the only sound. I reopened the photos, zooming in on the necklace, the watch, the wine. Every detail felt deliberate, each one designed to taunt. She wanted me to see this. She wanted me to feel it. And for a moment, I did. The grief hit sharp, hot, raw. Not for the things, but for what they meant. Memories, care, the small sacred pieces of a family that no longer existed. But pain, when you sit with it long enough, starts to change shape. It becomes focus. I opened my contacts list and called Darlene. She picked up on the second ring. "Maven, you okay?" "I need to ask you something," I said quietly. "What happens if someone uses personal property, something meant to be inherited, to manipulate family ownership?" There was a pause. "That depends," she said cautiously. "If it's listed in a will or carries sentimental value that was legally acknowledged, it's theft. Even if it's just emotional manipulation, it's still theft in intent." I closed my eyes. "That's what I thought. Do you want me to look into something?" "Not yet," I said, "but soon." Rain started tapping against the office windows, soft and rhythmic. I watched it streak down the glass, each drop tracing a quiet line, merging into another. For a long time, I didn't move. I just let the sound fill the room. My mother's necklace, her voice in memory. When people forget who you are, this will remind you. It wasn't anger now. It was something colder, clearer. I pulled open the bottom drawer of my desk. Inside was a small velvet box I hadn't touched in years. I ran my fingers over the lid before opening it. Inside was a folded envelope, yellowed at the edges. My mother's handwriting curved across it in ink that had faded but never lost its warmth. "For when they forget your worth." I exhaled slowly, the words anchoring something deep inside me. "It's time to remind them," I whispered. And this time it didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like a promise. That promise I made to myself in the stillness of my office. It carried me through the days that followed. Not out of rage, not out of pride, but out of something deeper, something steadier. The morning drizzle painted the courthouse steps with a quiet sheen as I walked up. Portland had a way of dressing confrontation in mist, as if to cushion the blow. I didn't mind. I wore gray, charcoal slacks, a matching blazer, no makeup beyond a soft lip tint. Neutral, calm, calculated. And around my neck, I wore the one thing that didn't match, my mother's necklace. I'd reclaimed it the night before through legal channels. The moment I held it again, the chain felt warmer than I remembered, as though it knew where it belonged. Inside, I moved through security, past the elevators, and toward courtroom 4C with my attorney beside me. Darlene didn't speak much. She didn't have to. Vela was already there, sitting next to our father, legs crossed like she owned the bench. She wore white. Of course she did. She always liked pretending she was the innocent one. When our eyes met, her lips curled. "She's really going to embarrass herself today," she whispered to him, not low enough to hide it. He didn't respond, just kept his hands folded, his jaw set tight. I didn't flinch. I didn't offer a glance or a word. I just walked past them, took my seat, and waited. My hands rested in my lap. No fidgeting, just the necklace between my fingers, the weight of it a quiet, grounding force. The hearing opened quickly. The judge was sharp-eyed, no nonsense. Middle-aged, tired, and probably 3 coffees into the day. Darlene stood first. She was methodical, presenting our documents one by one. The deed with both our signatures. The financial statements showing my consistent contributions. The photos, Vela in my house wearing my mother's necklace. The emails Vela had sent to friends, bragging about finally taking over what was mine. Vela's attorney objected to the photos. The judge waved it off. They're time-stamped. They show occupancy, intent, and possession of disputed items. They stay. The tension in the room shifted. You could feel it, like air being sucked out slowly. Vela crossed her arms. My father stared straight ahead. I still hadn't spoken. Then the judge turned to me. "Ms. Hale, would you like to make a statement?" I stood. My voice was steady. "I'm not here to win a house," I said. "I'm here to reclaim my name." A pause followed, short but sharp. Vela scoffed, loud enough to echo. "She's doing this to hurt us." The judge didn't even look her way. He looked at me. "No," he said, his tone firm. "She's doing this to protect what's hers." A recess was called. I stepped into the courthouse cafe, though I wasn't hungry. I ordered a coffee anyway, just for the warmth in my hands. The cup looked identical to the one from my apartment. White ceramic, thin rim, light brown ring from the brew inside. I didn't drink it, just held it. Watched the reflection of the ceiling lights dance across its surface. "Silence isn't weakness," I whispered, thumb tracing the handle. "It's focus." When court resumed, Darlene stood again. "One more item, Your Honor," she said. "Filed alongside the will, years ago." She held up a sealed envelope. The judge nodded. "Go on." "This is a handwritten note from Maven and Vela's mother. It was kept with the family's estate planning documents. We're submitting it as evidence of intent." She opened it. I already knew every word. I'd read it until I could see it in my sleep. Maven is the rightful heir to the Hale home, not for wealth, but because she kept the family alive when others could not. It wasn't legal language. It was heart language. And in that courtroom, it hit harder than any clause or contract ever could. My father blinked slowly. His mouth opened slightly, then shut. His fingers twitched in his lap. Vela froze. The confident smirk drained from her face. Her hand clenched her skirt, knuckles paling. I stayed seated, still, whole. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full. The judge gave a single nod, scribbled something, and looked up. "This court grants partial custodial rights of the estate to Ms. Maven Hale. She holds co-ownership, and is legally permitted to request eviction proceedings for any unauthorized occupant. Effective immediately. The gavel struck. It sounded like the end, but to me, it was a beginning. I stood, collected my folder, and turned toward the exit. Maven. The voice was soft, weak. My father. I paused, turned halfway. You already made me leave once, I said. Remember? I didn't wait for his reply. I stepped out of the courtroom. The drizzle outside hadn't stopped. As I walked down the stone steps, I caught my reflection in a shallow puddle. Rippling, not broken, just moving. The puddle rippled behind me as I stepped off the courthouse curb. The drizzle hadn't let up, but I didn't rush. 2 days later, I stood in front of the Hale house. The paint was the same, the windows clean, but the place looked different now. Not physically, but in the way you look at something after you've seen it through someone else's eyes. The metal of my key was cold in my palm. It slid into the lock with quiet ease. No resistance, no protest. Just a soft click, like the house had been waiting. But when I opened the door, I didn't step in right away. Something about crossing that threshold made my feet feel heavier than they should. I finally entered. The air hit me first. Dry, still, faintly floral. Vela's perfume. It clung to the curtains and the cushions as if it were trying to stay even after she'd gone. I turned on a light, dim, yellow, soft. The living room looked untouched, like a photo frozen in time. My father's chair still angled slightly toward the fireplace. The piano's lid half closed, gathering dust. My mother's framed photo on the mantel, eyes steady as ever. I ran my fingers lightly across the back of the couch as I walked by. The same fabric from my childhood, same cushions. Upstairs, it was silent. For half a second, I thought I heard laughter, hers, maybe mine, from long ago. But there was nothing. Just the low hum of the refrigerator and the weight of emptiness. In the dining room, the table was clear. Except for one thing, a white envelope, my name in Vela's handwriting. I didn't open it right away. I stood over it for a moment, staring like it might disappear. But it didn't. I sat down slowly, peeled it open, and unfolded the note. I didn't mean for it to go this far, but you never fought back. You made it so easy. Vila. That was it. No apology, no remorse. Just the kind of note you leave when you don't plan to see someone again. Underneath the note lay something smaller, colder, metallic. The other half of my mother's necklace. Snapped clean. The clasp broken. I pressed it into my palm and closed my fingers around it. It dug in, but I didn't let go. Her voice came back, uninvited but clear. When people forget who you are, I whispered the end to myself. Remind them. I placed both halves on the table. The chain, broken but not lost. Just like this house. Just like me. The sky outside darkened, deep twilight settling in. I lit a small candle near the window, not for the scent, but for the ritual. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel like a winner. I felt tired and clean. This wasn't about proving Vela wrong anymore. It wasn't even about reclaiming a house. It was about protecting something that should have never needed defending, peace. I stood up, walked slowly to the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of water, the same way I used to for Mom. The phone rang. I almost didn't answer, but I looked. Dad. I let it ring 3 times. Then I picked up. Maven, he said. His voice, I'd never heard it like that. Worn, but not just from age, from regret. I'm sorry, I should have seen it sooner. I didn't answer right away. You saw what you wanted to see, I finally said. We both did. A pause. Can I visit tomorrow? He asked. I exhaled, voice steady. Not cold, just real. Let's take it one day at a time. Silence again, but this time it wasn't painful. We hung up. I walked to the window. The rain had started again, soft, persistent. The kind that didn't demand attention but left its mark anyway. I didn't close the window. I let the cool air drift in, let the sound fill the silence that didn't hurt so much anymore. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of what would wash away. I turned off the light. The house slipped into shadow. On the dining table, the necklace glimmered faintly. 2 halves, side by side, waiting. The necklace still sat where I left it, its 2 halves catching the sunlight that had pushed through the kitchen window just enough to warm the table. The morning air carried that crispness only late autumn offers. Bright, still, but cold enough to remind you that winter wasn't far behind. I had been awake since just after 5, not from any nightmare or alarm, just a kind of restlessness I couldn't name. My body had slept, but my mind had been waiting. By 7, I was in the kitchen, the old coffee pot bubbling quietly on the stove. I moved almost mechanically, grabbing the mugs, setting them down, filling one, then the other. 2 mugs, one out of habit, one maybe out of hope. I didn't sit. I just stood by the sink, watching steam curl up from the cups. The house around me remained quiet, but not empty. It was full of memory now, some tender, some jagged. At 7:42, there was a knock. I didn't rush to the door. I walked slowly, as though giving myself time to steady my breath. When I opened it, my father was there, hands stuffed into his coat pockets, his hair grayer than I remembered, his face older, more tired than even the courtroom had revealed. "You look just like your mother today," he said softly. I nodded, didn't smile, didn't step aside, just nodded once, then turned and walked back into the kitchen. He followed. I motioned to the seat across from mine, and he sat without speaking. We didn't touch our coffee. It cooled between us as the silence stretched, thick and still like fog. I wasn't angry, but I wasn't at ease either. He finally broke the quiet. "I brought something." He reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope, aged, slightly yellowed at the edges, sealed with red wax. He pushed it across the table to me. "I found this in your mother's drawer, after the hearing. Thought you should read it." My fingers hesitated before touching it. It felt like breaking into a sacred space. I peeled the wax seal, unfolded the paper. My mother's handwriting. I knew it instantly. Elegant, but slightly shaky, like she'd written it, late at night, under dim light and with full heart. "To my daughters," it began. "One of you will inherit the home. The other must inherit forgiveness. Only then will this family survive." I blinked, let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "She wrote that before she got sick," my father said, voice barely above a whisper, "before any of this happened." I folded the letter again, slowly, and set it gently beside the coffee. "She knew," I murmured. "She saw all of this coming." He didn't reply. I got up without a word and walked over to the counter, opened the small dish beside the stove where I'd placed the broken necklace pieces the night before. I brought them to the table, placed them right beside the letter. "They both belonged to her," I said, "but I think this was meant for both of us too." His eyes dropped. He stared at the necklace, then the letter, then the table. "I failed both of you," he said quietly. "I made love into a scoreboard. I thought I was being fair, but I was just scared." Of what? He didn't say, but I didn't ask. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he stood, reaching for his coat. I thought he was leaving, but instead, he paused, turned back to me. "There's something else," he said. "Vela checked herself into rehab last night." My head lifted. "What?" "She called me, said she needed help, said she wasn't ready for you to know yet, but—" He stopped. "I figured you should." I couldn't say anything right away. I just stared at him. "Maybe," he added, "she finally saw what this was doing to her. Or to you. I don't know, but it's something." And strangely, it was. Not redemption, Not resolution. Just a thread, a beginning. I nodded once. Thank you for telling me. He looked at me the way a father should look at his daughter, not as someone to manage or mend, but as someone to meet. Then, for the first time in decades, he reached across the table and placed his hand over mine. He didn't squeeze, just rested it there, warm and human. I didn't pull away. When he finally turned to leave, he said, "You know where to find me." I followed him to the door, then watched him walk down the path, hands tucked back into his coat, head slightly bowed. I stood in the doorway for a long time after he disappeared from view. The house felt different now, still quiet, still cold, but somehow softer. I went back to the table, picked up the necklace pieces and the letter, looked at them. One of us inherited the house. Maybe the other could still inherit forgiveness. I opened the drawer where we used to keep birthday cards and spare stamps, pulled out a small box, lined it with tissue, placed the two halves of the necklace inside, folded the letter too, wrote Vila on the top in my mother's handwriting, almost, and sealed it. I sealed it, pressed the envelope flat, and set it by the door for the morning pickup. I didn't know if Vela would open it, didn't even know if she'd want to, but I knew I needed to send it. That was 2 weeks ago. Now, winter had arrived. The kind of morning where the world feels muted, as if the snow itself is asking you to lower your voice. I stood by the window, watching small flakes drift down, layering the front lawn in soft white. The sky was pale and kind, almost like it had forgiven the earth. The world outside looked untouched, clean, like a page waiting to be written on again. Inside, my house felt different, still but not lonely. Every sound had space to breathe. The hum of the heater, the faint creak of wood, even the rhythmic drip of melted snow from the eaves. On the kitchen counter sat a small brown box, returned mail. My heart gave a slow, steady ache when I saw the sender label, mine. I picked it up gently, running my finger over the taped edges. It was the box I'd sent to her, the one with the necklace, the one I'd hoped might bridge the space between us. It shouldn't have come back, but it had. I carried it to the table and sat down. My hands hesitated before I opened it, like my body needed a moment to catch up with my heart. Inside, resting on the soft white tissue, was the necklace, whole again. The break I remembered, the jagged crack, was gone. Someone had mended it. The clasp had been replaced. The silver chain gleamed, polished, as if it had never been broken at all. Beneath it, folded once, was a note, her handwriting. I fixed what I broke. You don't owe me forgiveness, but I owe you truth. I thought I wanted your house. I really just wanted to matter. Thank you for reminding me how. I didn't move for a long time, just stared at the page, at the words that trembled somewhere between apology and surrender. Then the tears came, slow, quiet, not heavy. The kind you don't fight, because they don't feel like loss anymore. They feel like release. I lifted the necklace carefully, feeling its weight in my hand. The chain was cold, but it warmed quickly against my skin. For the first time in years, I clasped it around my neck, and in that simple motion, something inside me aligned again. The reflection in the kitchen window caught the faint glint of silver at my throat. It shimmered just enough to make me smile. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, I whispered. It means I finally stopped living inside the hurt. The words didn't feel rehearsed. They felt like they'd been waiting to be said. I walked into the living room, sat down on the couch, and opened my laptop. The screen came alive with the homepage I'd been building quietly these past few weeks. The Hail Home Project, for women rebuilding after betrayal. Below it, faces. Not perfect ones, not polished ones, but real ones. Women who'd written to me after hearing fragments of my story through mutual friends. Each one had a story that echoed mine in some way. Lost trust, lost family, lost direction. And each one had chosen to rebuild instead of disappear. I scrolled through the photos, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time: purpose. This was my version of revenge, not spite, not triumph. Transformation. Turning what was broken into something that could hold others. I heard the crunch of footsteps outside and looked toward the window. My father. I opened the door before he could knock. He stood there, bundled in a dark coat, holding a small box wrapped in silver paper. His breath came out in white clouds. "Christmas came early," he said softly. I smiled. "You're 2 days late for early." He chuckled, the sound almost unfamiliar but welcome. We sat in the kitchen again, same table, same chairs, same mugs. But everything felt different this time. No tension, no walls, just two people trying to exist in the same space without the old ghosts between them. We talked about small things, neighbors, the snow, how the power had flickered the night before. We didn't talk about Vela until he noticed the necklace. "She'd be proud of you, Maven," he said. I touched the pendant lightly. "Maybe she'd be proud of all of us." He nodded, eyes glistening. Then he reached for his tea, hands trembling just enough for me to notice. For once, the silence that settled between us wasn't heavy. It was warm, shared, like sitting beside a fire that doesn't need tending. After he left, I stood by the window again. The snow was falling harder now, thick flakes swirling under the porch light. I opened the door and stepped outside. The cold air met my face, but it didn't bite, it cleared. I tilted my head back, eyes closed, letting the snow touch my lashes, my hair, my cheeks. "I used to think peace was silence," I whispered to no one. "Now I know, peace is when silence finally feels like home." A faint buzz came from inside. I stepped back in and looked at my phone on the counter. One new notification. Subject: from Vela.